Hello everyone, welcome to the tutorial for DatabaseLink with Wolfram language. This tutorial is made up of three parts. We will go through each one of them in detail. Let's start with part 1. In this part, we will know about what DatabaseLink is, some of the key features of DatabaseLink, how does it work, how to make connections to your database using this package, how to set it up, how to configure a connection, and about a little GUI that we have, which is called Database Explorer, a little bit about security and authentication. So, Database Link is a package that provides functions that helps you establish connection between Wolfram language and your database. In Wolfram language, this is a toolkit in which we call as which I also call as a package. Now, any function that you would perform on a database engine, you can perform that using Database Link. Some of the key features of Database Link are it works with a wide variety of SQL databases. It comes with a lightweight database, which is HSQLDB. Most of the listed database engines here, which is MySQL, SQL Server, Oracle, Postgres, are compatible with this package. Mostly SQL and both Wolfram language commands can be used with this package. There is a GUI called as Database Explorer, which is a very basic GUI that you can use. It also supports batch operations, which is good for when having large amounts of data. If you want to insert huge amounts of data, this is a very good option. And it also supports several database types like numbers, strings, binary data, date time, and Wolfram language expressions. So apart from the regular types, there are special data types that are built into the language, and we will go through them one by one. So let's first see how this package actually works. So here we have a small diagram depicting the flow when you issue a Wolfram language command to perform a database operation. So what lies in between the database and your Wolfram language layer is a Java layer. Here we use one of our other Wolfram language technology called as JLink, which communicates with the database and also with the top Wolfram language layer. The part that communicates with the database, which is the Java layer, here does it through this JDBC. That's why we have in our database link package, we have the JDBC drivers that are bundled up here. So once you hit Shift Enter with the command just goes to this Java layer and then it gets executed. It gets the data from the database and comes back to Wolfram language layer, where it can be used. It's like a list of data, and where it can be used with other Wolfram language functions like plots or for numerical analysis or data modeling, etc. Now, because we have commands that you can use in both raw SQL and Wolfram language, it is a very convenient tool. Like if you are not very familiar with SQL language, you can just follow the Wolfram language commands, which are pretty intuitive and it's easy to use. And on the other hand, let's say if you're not very familiar with Wolfram language, but you're good at SQL, that works fine too. So there are functions where you can actually provide just a raw SQL command, and that works as well. Now let's see where this database link sits in the installation. So if you evaluate this command here, it opens up this directory which is called database link. And if you have Mathematica installed, you can evaluate this and this will open up this particular directory here. And inside this, you can see that there is a Java directory and a kernel directory, and that's where the source code for database link sits. So this is all the Java classes, and this is all the Wolfram language side of it. So if you want to do a little experiment on your own, you can also modify this source files a little bit and then reload the package and see what effect it has. Now let's see how we make connections to the database. So since this is a package within Wolfram language, it needs to be loaded in your current kernel session first. So to do that, we issue this command called needs database link. This will load the package into your current session. Now, to do that, I already said that there are some JDBC drivers that are bundled with database link. Now we have to make sure that these drivers are on the path or on the class path to be recognizable by database link. By default, they are already added to the path, so you don't have to do a add to class path or anything to make them available on the path. However, if you find that there is a database that you want to use for which a JDBC driver is not included in the package, you can always download that and add it up in several locations within your Mathematica installation. One such location is this $user base directory, and another location is this base directory. And all the other current drivers actually sit in the $installation directory. And this is another place where you can add it as. Now that we have loaded the package, we want to connect to a database called as demo. This demo database comes with Mathematica. It's a very lightweight database built upon HSQLDB, and you don't have to configure anything to work with this database. And the way you open a connection to this database is using this open SQL connection command and just give the name of the database. So once you do that, you get this SQL connection object. It is basically a Java object. So if I do connection full form, you can see that internally this is just a Java object that it created for communication between Wolfram language and the database. Now at any point, if you want to know what are the current open connections, you can evaluate SQL connections. I already opened a few connections so that you can see the output of this one, that there are 4 connections currently open. And at any point, if you want to see what are the properties of a particular open connection, you can use SQL connection information. Now, this SQL connection information gives a lot of information. So I'm suppressing the output here by putting a semicolon, but you can always take a look at its short form. So these are the properties for which it will tell you what are the values set for that connection. And there's about 167 of them. Now, if you want to close a connection, close SQL connection and just give the connection object, and that will close the current open connection. Now, in the previous example, we saw that we're opening a connection to an already built-in database, and that is already configured, and we don't have to put a server name or a username or password or any other properties that we would rather use in a connection string. Now, let's say if you want to use all those properties and open a connection, then you can provide some extra arguments to open SQL connection. For example, here you can see that I'm providing the name of the database engine and providing the database to which I want to open a connection and a name and a username. So let's try that to open a connection here. Another example that's more commonly used is with MySQL connection. Now this MySQL database is on my local machine and it's called TestDB, and the machine is localhost, and I'm providing a username and password. Now MySQL connection J, this is the name of the configuration file that sits in DatabaseLink. Now this configuration file consists of all the connection details in it. If you go to the DatabaseLink user guide, you will be able to see how to configure a connection, how to make this configuration file and put it at a location which is recognizable by DatabaseLink. Now here, if you notice, for password, I have a dollar prompt in there, which means that when I evaluate this, it should prompt up a window for me to enter the password rather than just typing the password in the notebook here. So that's the prompt we get. I'm going to enter my password here, and that makes a connection to TestDB. So this dollar prompt is useful if you don't want the password to show up for confidentiality reasons. Now there is also a graphical user interface which is built into DatabaseLink, and this is a very basic form of the interface. It's something that beginners can use to get familiar with how DatabaseLink is working and how to select something from a table and do very simple operations. Let me show you an example here. So when I evaluate this Database Explorer command, this is the window that comes up, and I can make a connection to any of the configurations that I've already saved. Now this will show me what tables the demo database has and what columns it has. And so currently the table selected is sample table 1, and the column that's selected is entry. If I just click on result, it's going to select everything from entry. Now there's also a connection tool which is called the OpenSQL connection tool, and that is just the connection part of the previous Database Explorer that we saw. So let's say if you want to establish a connection more frequently to a certain database and you want to save its configuration in a file, you can do that and have your connections listed here. So once you open this, click on, let's say, demo and connect, it's just going to give you a connection object, same as by putting all the arguments within OpenSQL connection. Now let's go to the security and authentication part, which is one of the most important parts when you are working with a database. So if your database supports SSL, it is possible for DatabaseLink to talk to the database through SSL. There are some steps that need to be followed, and the 4 major ones are listed here. The first one is to get a certificate of authority and then generate a trust store file. Then you need to configure the Java that you're using to use that trust store file, and then configure your OpenSQL connection to use the SSL. Let me open up the documentation and show you a little more detail about this one. So this is a more comprehensive documentation on using SSL, and here's an example using PostgreSQL. So here we are creating a certificate called ca.crt. It's a sample certificate, and then we are just creating a trust store file here. Now you want to add that trust store file to your current Java JVM arguments, and that's done. Which is what is done here. And when you're doing the OpenSQL connection, you can either provide this as a query parameter, wherein SSL is set to true, or you can use properties option within OpenSQL connection and set SSL to true. Now this will let you use SSL with DatabaseLink, but you have to be sure that your database supports SSL in the first place. Now, there are several tips that you can use to make your operations secure. You can use a connection configuration file, and you can always encode that file so that the connection configuration is not easily readable by any third party. And you can use $prompt, as I showed you before. And if you're using a web server, you can also use the authentication mechanism provided by the web server, and Mathematica will retrieve the password from the server. And the details for all of this is available in the database user guide. Here's some resources for you to go through. We saw the connections part, so database connections and resources documentation is available here, and it tells you all the different functions that relate to making and configuring a connection. There is also a documentation on Database Explorer. It's a little more detailed than what we saw, and also includes the documentation on connection tool and how to query the database using this tool. So this brings us to the end of part 1. Next, we will be going on to part 2, which will show how to use different commands to query the database.